Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council today for another really exciting webinar, which is delivered in partnership with the Canadian Medical Isotope Ecosystem. Today's webinar is on a very exciting topic and is the second in our series with the CMIE that focuses on the funding and investment of isotopes and radiopharmaceuticals here in Canada. Our first webinar, for those of you who joined us back in September for our first conversation on investing in isotopes, focused on the investment community, and we included a panel of investment leaders who drew from their experience in the investment community to outline opportunities for the industry to better engage with investors and their perspectives on attracting capital both from Canada and internationally. So today, as we'll hear very shortly, we are really excited to be flipping that conversation to now hear from companies and leaders in the industry who have successfully raised capital on their perspectives on the current investment landscape in Canada and how they approach engaging with the investment community. As we're all aware, Canada has a number of exciting companies and research groups who are actively looking to scale up or to commercialize revolutionary drugs, devices, or projects. And so our hope with this webinar and the broader series that we're doing with the CMIE is to be able to provide some information to help connect innovators with new avenues for raising capital, but also to support the investment community and governments to provide relevant industry information, clinical updates, and emerging trends to help inform future investment decisions. So with that, I'd like to thank the CMIE again for your partnership on this webinar and to all of you for joining us here today. And I will turn it over to our moderator for today's session, who is Owen Roberts, the CEO of the Centre for Probe Development and Commercialization, and one of the co-leads on the Canadian Medical Isotope Ecosystem. Thank you, Owen.
Thank you very much, Melody. And of course, thanks once again to the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council for working and arranging these webinars. I find them very enjoyable, and I really enjoy the conversations we've had with our guests in the past. As Melody mentioned, our last webinar in September, we're lucky enough to have experienced venture capitalist investors who have invested in the radiopharmaceutical space here in Canada. This time, we're going to talk to people on the other side of that fence. The people who have come up with great ideas along radiopharmaceuticals or companies in general, and have their companies have reached a point where they need external capital to move on to the next stage. So we're very lucky today to be joined by three very interesting panelists. Bill Dickey, who with Pandora Pharmaceuticals, who has been involved in radiopharmaceuticals for quite some time. He and I are probably some of the more experienced people in this field for the last little while. Nick Calvert from Yellowbird Diagnostics, and Gadir Shubasi from a company that's near and dear to my heart, Atom V. And so we're very much looking forward to hearing everyone's perspective as an investee in this space and the adventures that they've gone through from there. So without much further ado, I'd love to start off with talking with Nick. And Nick, you've just recently gone out to raise capital for your company, Yellowbird. I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself, Yellowbird, and what the experience was in the current market for a company at your stage for raising capital in this market.
Absolutely. Thanks, Owen, and thanks to everybody for having me and hearing from Yellowbird today. So just to give you a bit of background on myself and Yellowbird, so I'm Nick Calvert. I recently last year finished my PhD in chemistry at the University of Ottawa. And as one of three co-founders of Yellowbird, who all worked under the lab of Adam Schuhendler at the University of Ottawa, we spent our PhDs making contrast agents, and one of them happened to be a fluorine-18 radiopharmaceutical for diagnostic purposes. And so later into my degree, we realized we had some real commercial opportunities for this dye. And I think the three of us really didn't want to let the project end with the degree. So we decided to bring this out into Yellowbird, start this company, and start moving forward. And so as three scientists starting a company, you can imagine we didn't really know what we were doing to start off. We really learned it along the way. And I think one of the most difficult things for us at the time was really raising capital, especially coming out of that academic setting. Things get a lot more expensive, they get a lot more serious, need a lot more care to really push forward. And so for us, when we started out with Yellowbird, the first real big hurdle was deciding which product we're going to move forward first. And then the big second one was obviously trying to find that financing. And so we were really lucky with our academic roots to be able to write grants pretty well and be able to find those grants really easily. And Canada and Ontario specifically have been fantastic for providing really easy to get early stage grants for large sums of money to really push tech like this forward. And I'll shout out Facet first, who is our first big grant investors, a fairly sizable one that really came to the table and said, "We believe in what you're doing. You're going to help push this forward." CMIE was another big one that came for us and a couple others in the Ontario ecosystem. But you can only go so far with non-dilutive capital. So we did start a pre-seed round last year, January. And to be honest with you, it was really difficult. I think especially on the radiopharmaceutical side, there wasn't a ton of investing traditionally at the early stage for companies. I think biotech, especially in the last couple of years, it's really just been a downtrend on investing overall. So in terms of getting lucky on the timing of starting the company, we were great, but in terms of the timing of investment, we were not great. So it was really, really hard to push that forward. And I think we've been luckier than most. We actually just oversubscribed our pre-seed round right now, so things have been well going forward, but we've still been pushing this round forward since January. Some of the biggest hurdles as an early stage company, especially with three scientists, again, comes down to people who are in love with the science and really not as in love with the business side initially. So really trying to like kind of hone that message and speak to investors. But for us in that early stage, it was really finding those early stage investors that kind of believed in us as people and what we were doing as a company to really push forward. And we're still in that pre-seed stage right now. So our luck with VCs hasn't been very good, but it's been really focused on grants and those early stage angel investors who are willing to take that risk on you.
Oh, thanks, Nick. Thanks. That's very interesting. And again, I'm sure many people in the audience have very similar experiences as yourself, and we can come back to that in a little bit. But Bill, as I mentioned before, you and I have been around in biotech for a while, and I've seen very much how the industry has changed. You've actually been one of the few people who had raised capital in the radiopharmaceutical space quite some time ago, and just curious how you see from your different companies, a little bit background about your companies, but how has it changed, and what's the community like now for compared to your first company?
Okay, well, thanks, Owen. Currently, Pandora is partnering with the University of Ottawa Heart Institute on an innovative new PET imaging agent, and more about that later. But my overall experience is kind of in two parts. Spent a long career with MDS Nordion back when Nordion was a major player in nuclear medicine. Sadly, not anymore. Then a series of four startups, two radiopharm, two more traditional biopharma. Two we took public on the Toronto Stock Exchange, and two are the second one is I'm working on now is one of two that stayed private. About 12 years ago, we were out looking for funding for Atrius Pharmaceuticals, developing an imaging agent, radiopharmaceutical. At that time, the venture capital community in Canada didn't seem to get the joke. That radiopharmaceuticals were kind of a niche product and an acquired taste. We ended up financing the company first $500,000 with angel investors who I'd worked with before on previous initiatives. And from there, when we were ready to take the next step, we got much more traction of going to the radiopharmaceutical industry, to existing players. We ended up being acquired over time in multi-stages by advanced accelerator applications. So our net was cast to the States, but also to Europe, where we got some traction. ultimately, AAA, as many know, was acquired by Novartis, and that was kind of an inflection point, I think, in terms of interest in the renewed interest in the radiopharmaceutical space. Stayed with AAA for a couple of years to launch Lutathera and NetSpot in Canada and make sure they were approved and in the case of Lutathera reimbursed. So that's brings me to today. I mean, I'm a lot. I think it's a lot better environment now than it certainly was 10 years ago. So thanks again for having me.
Bill, thanks very much for sharing that. My colleague Gadir, Adam V, as full disclosure, was spun out of CPDC, or CPDC was spun out of Adam V. We can put that on its head one way or the other, but the good team over at Adam V during the spin out went out and raised a substantial amount of money to facilitate quite an exciting plan. Gadir, if you would maybe talk a little bit about yourself, Adam V, and the story of how you guys went out and who you went to raise your capital from.
Absolutely. Thank you, Owen. Good morning, everyone. It's truly a pleasure to participate in this panel with the key leaders here. So as Owen mentioned, I am Gadir Shabasi, the Director of Business Development at AtomV Global Radiopharma, or AtomV for short. I have been in the company and the mother company of AtomV, which is CPDC, as you just heard from Owen, for 5+ years now. I've seen the journey of the whole launch of AtomV, and it's really exciting to share our success story with you. So just a bit of background about CPDC for those of you who are not familiar, and I'm sure having Owen here speak to it is a Caesar that is that at the time when it was founded in 2008, NCE funded and of course McMaster based. And we developed expertise at CPDC for GMP manufacturing of radiopharmaceuticals. So as you know, this is a unique skill set that obviously takes a really special labor to manufacture these drugs that are meant to be injected into patients who are suffering from devastating diseases such as cancer. And over about a decade or so, we became world known for our expertise in this industry. And basically GMP manufacturing of these drugs is something that CPDC has started to be well known and have the reputation for. Our NCE funding basically came to an end in 2023, and we had a few choices to make: either remain status quo, which means continue the way we were, or go out and spin out the CDMO unit of CPDC and specialize in the area that we really gained our expertise in, so that we can expand and grow our business operations to meet the demands of this exciting field. As you heard from the panelists, radiopharmaceuticals grew tremendously with the Lutathera, Pluvicto entering the commercial market, and many more assets that are currently and in the clinic. We saw the need for GMP manufacturing for clinical, but also for commercial, really expanding, and we were uniquely positioned in this area, and at the time where we obviously realized if we don't seize the opportunity at this momentum of this industry, that would be a loss for us. So that's when Bruno Pacan, our CEO, and me supporting him, of course, we decided to go out and look for funding. Joining Nick in his story, as you heard earlier, it wasn't an easy journey. So the first thing that we had to decide, Owen, is obviously who do we want to talk to? And obviously, we are a contract development and manufacturing organization, or CDMO for short. So as a CDMO, you need to decide the type of investors that you want to speak with. For that, we went to private equity firms as opposed to venture capitals, as you heard from Nick, and maybe also Bill has that experience. And the drug developers tend to speak with the VCs. For CDMOs, that's obviously the list of investors that we've made. And we went out and we told our story. And it's a phenomenal story because at the time before launching at CPDC, we were making $20 million revenues in a non-for-profit organization. Which is really amazing, and the future, the future was bright, and our goal was to expand and meet the growth of radiopharmaceuticals. I would have loved to tell you that Canadian private equity believed in us, and we managed to unlock some of that here. But unfortunately, we didn't. We ended up getting our funding from a U.S. Avigo healthcare firm, which obviously saw the potential, seized the opportunity, and gave us more than $90 million that we were able to launch AtomV in August of 2022 and dedicate that funding fully to a really exciting expansion plans of our business. So as we are currently speaking, I'm really happy to tell you that building behind me is our new facility that is currently under construction in Hamilton, Ontario. So right next, very, very close to the Hamilton International Airport. It's the largest in North America, as we hear, 72,300 square footage that is dedicated for the GMP manufacturing of radiopharmaceuticals, and uniquely positioned. Our strategic location, obviously, is being proximal to the Hamilton International Airport, but also to Pearson and to the US border, really gives us the leverage of being able to globally distribute these radiotherapeutics. As you know, these are delicate, short-lived drugs that need to be shipped very, very in an expert way so that they can leave our door and reach the final destination to be injected into patients just in time. So that's, in a nutshell, how we basically succeeded in raising this funding. I did say that while at the time when we spoke to Canadian private equity firms, we didn't unlock some of that funding, but now we have a few ongoing projects under evaluation with Invest Ontario, with the CMIE, as you know, and with IRAP. So we are a Canadian company. We are proud to be part of Canada, and we do our best to take advantage of any funding opportunities that we can have in Canada and in Ontario to fuel our expansion. So I'm very happy to tell you more if you would like to find out more about the journey, but that's in a nutshell how the success story of AtomV. Of course, that was all with the support of CPDC and McMaster University, and being part of the CNIC, it has been tremendously supportive for our success story.
Thanks, Kadir. Actually, I find this very instructive for a lot of people. The fact that there is a difference between typical venture capital and what they look for, and then a private equity firm, which looks for someone who's already manufacturing, already has revenue, already has, and is looking for expansion capital, etc. like that. So that's a private equity. And I think it's very important that people out there understand that you have to realize what kind of investor would be interested in your industry. There's an amount of research that has to go on there. You should take a look at who has invested in this space before, who has an interest maybe in this space or understanding. Radiopharmaceuticals, Bill, as you mentioned before, no one got the joke before. There were very few people who globally who understood the joke before, because the industry had not had the chance to prove that it could be a profitable business. And as it goes forward from there, Nick, I wouldn't mind going back to you just for a quick second. I think some of the people listening might be quite intrigued about the evolution possibly of your pitch. You mentioned before that you are talking about how you started off maybe or some of the people talking too much about the technology and not thinking about the product and the commercialization. How did that evolve, and how long did that take in that process from your side internally?
We could bury the first pitch deck in the backyard. That would be the best thing for me because I've looked back a few times, it was horrendous. And it's still constantly evolving. And I think speaking for my team as scientists, you fall in love with the product, right? You work so much on it to get it to where it is. I'm a chemist by training, so just the synthesis for me is always a lot of fun. So you really fall in love with the product and you really spend a lot of time on it. But I mean, the people you're talking to are there to make money at the end of the day. People want to help for sure, but the people at the end of the day are there to make money. And one of the key messages we were missing in those early first few pitches was like, how are people going to make money? Why is this good investment? And so really the evolution came about that. It came about stepping away from the product and the science and finding, where's the market for this? How are people going to make money off of this? Is this a real need? And really starting to diving into things like comparables and use cases and really building out the market for it and how are we going to push this towards a market? And so the pitch deck honestly is still constantly evolving. We raised quite a bit of money on the current version. The second version, I think, is even better right now, which is probably going to start being used next year. But really, it's trying to step away from yourself as a scientist and thinking more about the audience that you're talking to. I think that's the big takeaway from it.
Excellent, excellent. Um, I find that you said something insightful there that I always find is that people tend to fall in love with their technology. And that's very easy to do because you spend so much time working on this problem for so many years. And everything is so obvious to you what a great idea this is, but you have to figure out how you relay that to others. And actually, Bill, I'm sure as you've gone through for the last little while, you've had these technologies, but we also run in the gap between I have one molecule that's really good or one program, but I also have a platform in behind me. Like the balance between do I sell the platform or do I sell my lead? Uh, how do you evolve maybe that kind of pitch, or in the two? Do you find that people now are more interested in platforms versus just one program, or did you have any experience along those lines, Bill?
Well, I think with investors, it's um, they want you to have a platform and more than one thing, but they also want you to focus on the one thing, right? So they I think to be able to do one thing well is the most important. And what one of the observations I have in this business is the incubation period is a lot longer than you think it's going to be. Um, I think of some of the cancer therapy products that have come on the market in the last few years, and they've been the culmination of 20 and in some cases 30 years of development and clinical experience, and then they're overnight successes. And in investors want to minimize risk, and I think there's one of the main activities for a startup is to do what's necessary to de-risk their product as much as possible and get them fully hatched before they're ready to go out there. So anyway, that's a few thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, and Gadir, I find it also interesting from for Atom V and as the growth that came out. I think you mentioned the fact that there's also been a lot of investment into Atom V, not from external VCs, but you guys have done a great job, I think, of leveraging other opportunities and other pockets there. What are the kind of pockets of other types of cash maybe, and what's been the experience from your board and your investors towards this? Have they put any constraints on this, or is it generally viewed as very positive, go out and do whatever you can?
Yeah, no, great questions, Owen. And as I mentioned earlier, obviously we focused on private equity because they are more interested in investing into CDMO space. There's also a question I see on the chat why VCs aren't interested in R&V. And from our experience, when VCs are approached, they are obviously more apt towards drug developers who give them a higher return on investment as opposed to a manufacturer. Having said that, though, obviously the space is very attractive. The momentum is ripe. And when you asked what other pockets, the PEs were obviously the focus, but debt financing or any opportunities that we can find in Canada, be it a grant or a loan, we are exploring all options so that we can support our business growth. And we obviously look to Canada first. And to answer the question, and because I see that that's connected to your question as well, Owen, Canadian investors, from our experience, I mean, maybe Nick and Bill can chime in here, they tend to be more risk adverse. So when they heard our story, they said, nice, but please go raise your seed and then come back and talk to us when you succeed. So that was kind of a consistent message that we got. And then we did get a tremendous amount of funding for Series A, thanks to Bruno's efforts. And that's when we started to receive a lot of phone calls from the same firms that we talked to. And, it was like you wish that, they saw that opportunity earlier, but it took for Avigo to see that potential for them to, see, there's something there to unlock. But to also address your question on the investors are obviously, professionals in this field, see it, know the market very well, understand the value, understand the whole value chain and the supply chain aspect of it. Of course, drug development is a huge component of it, but if you don't have a manufacturing partner who can support you with that, then you can only succeed so much. So there's definitely an advantage to having investment into the CDMO space. And if my numbers are right, I think it's projected by 2030 that the CDMO space in radiopharmaceuticals alone is supposed to reach more than $5 billion. So that's a pretty good size of a market there that we're looking to obviously have a good share of it. And as I mentioned, we are world leaders in this space, and we know the market. We know the industry. We know that there are others who know what we're doing, but we stand out by our expertise. It's unique, by our experience, the number of years that we've gained, that we leveraged thanks to CPDC for giving us that opportunity, of course, and the quality of work that we deliver. Our logistics capabilities. Again, I mean, this industry, is phenomenal because you can make the drug, but if you can't ship it to where it needs to be shipped in time, there's no use of it for the patient at the end of the day. So we know how to do that very well. We can ship to 25 countries, with more than 99% reliability in our KPI. So I'm really proud that we have succeeded in this fundraising, and our investors continue to support us with any needs so that we can complete the new facility in time so that we can start to increase our capacity. We're looking at least tenfold of what we currently have at McMaster University. And believe me, we have people knocking on our door every day for, more help, more needs for their product to be manufactured. And we're definitely well positioned and uniquely present in the moment. So I hope I answered your question, Owen.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. I mean, we're very much at a unique time. Sorry, Bill, you wanted to add some thought?
Well, my thought was with regard to Canadian companies. We're all proudly Canadian companies here. But when I think of the isotope business overall, I don't see any borders, and I think it's truly an international business. And Canada is always punched above its weight in the business, mostly I think because of public investment that's gone back generations. and also the quality of our large academic institutions in Canada and the research that's come out of them. But I would think it would be a real exception if a company came to full maturity strictly as a Canadian company with Canadian investment and Canadian operations. I think that would be a very, very rare thing indeed.
Yep, you're right, Bill. I fully agree. I would love for that day to come.
I think that's I think it's always a good target. It's a nice North Star to have, but I completely agree. I mean, we've had these conversations previously. I think someone popped up in the chat box that, BDC has said there's several 10 billion or something in that neck of the woods of dry powder for venture capital. But you have a couple things that take away there. Venture capital is, siloed. There's some for IT, which is very popular right now because the time to market is fairly short and you don't have regulatory risk. The number of major players on the VC community in Canada, if you added up all the capital that they had to put to work, is somewhere closer or less than $1 billion that to put to work. And if you think about the fact for an oncology phase 1, 2, and 3 trials, you're talking several $100 million about depending, but it's going to be somewhere between $400 and $600 million to do a proper oncology trial. What you're basically asking is that every VC puts almost all their money into one company to make that work, and that's where we're at. It does, as Bill, you said, this is an international business, and we're very lucky we punch above our weight. All the parties here have had some connection with universities, which I think has been very important, and very important how they supported, or that they have being supported by other grants, et cetera, coming out from that. And that's very important as we build these things. But I don't look at it as a loss. I mean, Bill, you have built companies, sold companies, and then turned around and reinvested into companies. I've done the same. I think that's a very healthy ecosystem to continue growing. I don't know, Bill, if you want to add to that as well from your own experience, but this is a great country to be investing in early stage ideas, and there's a lot going on there. What I would like to ask, though, talking about the venture capital, et cetera, is I think Nick and Bill, you both mentioned that you did seed rounds, and with angel investors. Bill, if I don't mind, I'd like to start with you and then come back to Nick in a second. But when I raised capital back in 2000 from seed and angel investors, I found that it was very diffuse, uninformed. Not uninformed is not fair, but they weren't as familiar with biotech, probably stretching with their investment knowledge. Did you find that, Bill, now? And what do you find from the angel community now in biotech? Is it more informed? Is it more organized?
I don't have a lot of experience with a very organized angel community. Where we raised our first $500,000 for Atrius was effectively people in Ottawa that had a connection to the Ottawa Heart Institute, believed in it, were prepared to take a small amount of their money and put it into what's essentially a high risk venture, but with confidence in the scientists and as well as the businessmen, and who have sort of done it before with and had a not bad experience coming out of it.
Yeah. I think yeah, sorry. I think Bill's right with that too. It's for us, so we've worked with mostly organized angel groups now, and it really is kind of a mileage will vary depending on where you go. I mean, we started out in Ottawa with Capital Angel, and our lead investor is one of the best lead investors I know. He was just in love with what we did right away. And really at that angel stage, again, you're kind of betting on the founders and betting on the technology more than how long the ride's going to take. It's more about the people than anything else. But we've gone to other places in Southern Ontario and completely struck out. So I think it's about finding the people who are willing to take that risk on you and who believe in the technology. And something Bill said earlier about the last 10 years being a little different. I mean, people like Bill and others have really built this up for people like me to come in now and be more successful in fundraising because the recent string of buyouts we've had just in Canada alone in the last 2 years have really kind of expose the ecosystem to angel investors and the less educated in this area more than before. So they'll see some companies like ours coming up and be like, oh, it's kind of like this, it's kind of like that, and have a little bit more experience seeing it. And that's honestly made my life a lot easier. And that's true for this, and that's true for bringing startups out of university. So in that sense, we did come in at the right time where there's been a lot done before us that's helped out quite a bit.
In your pitch deck, do you use comparables to show to people about? Do you try and find something? You could please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, I think we ran three case studies, and Fusion obviously being one of them. But so we're diagnostic, so it's a little different at the end of the day. But we have two other companies that were Canadian based. One was Servo, and I believe Xionex, but Xionex might be American. But those are kind of case studies that we really built off of towards kind of like showing these investors this is where we need to get to in terms of manufacturing and regulatory as these kinds of inflection points or milestones to where one, you can see an exit, and two, we're seeing enough traction within the ecosystem that we're going on the right path.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's always very useful. Actually, it was just an interesting question from our audience, and again, I encourage people to put something in the Q&A if you have something. But they were asking about, some of the investors that you often hear that, oh, we're not just money, we're here to add some value or do something along those lines. Do you generally find that those come to fruition, partnering with an industry partner, et cetera? Have you had some experience with those? Where it either succeeds or is it often just an empty promise without naming names? So we go from there. I don't know if anyone would like to have some thoughts on that.
I can start. I mean, with our angel investors, I mean, in terms of finding other angels and other groups, yes, absolutely. In terms of actual know-how in this field, not really, but it depends with who you work with. But when you know this, we have some great industrial partners as well who've been extremely helpful in terms of advisory and guidance. And not to change the subject too far off from this, but Gadir made a really good point about this earlier that the manufacturing and what we do in terms of making these products is so unique outside of the drug development side that it really takes a lot of specific know-how. And the best advice that Owen gave to me a long time ago was that you're still underestimating the manufacturing. And as I print out my 700th page of this week for the GMP, we still are underestimating the manufacturing. And so that's where like finding those types of people, even in the non-investment side, to get that kind of knowledge base within your company, if you don't have it beforehand, it's so important because it takes so long. It's just such a massive lift.
Fully agree, Nick. And thank you, Owen, for saying that to Nick. And we also find that experience when we have startups, young companies coming to us with requests. And clearly, there's a lot of education that we need to do on our side and to let them know this is not as trivial as I mean, nothing is trivial. But as you said, this space is very unique and has specialized skills that sometimes get underestimated. So that maturity comes obviously with time and experience, but I'm 100% concurring with Nick. And Nick, I also in terms of diagnostics, I also think yes, therapeutic is obviously where the money is, but diagnostics are not to be underestimated, because if you don't have them, then you obviously won't know where the therapeutic should be. So in terms of leading the drug to where it needs to be on the target side of things, I mean. But
We talked about this a little bit yesterday in the pre-call, and I mean,
yeah.
again, I'm not going to bogart this with diagnostics, but I mean, with things with diagnostics, we're so used to seeing, med tech technology coming out that's, we can see one biomarker, it can identify one disease, and there really isn't a market for that. But with the stuff we're doing with pets, specifically with radiopharma, I mean, we can see so many different things, such broad ranges of diseases. And since FDG, no one's seen that. In like 30 years, we really haven't seen very modern use diagnostics like that. And I think for the less educated investors, it's confusing and it appears unfocused, when really it's just how we've operated for so long in that field. But I'll digress on that for now.
No, I think that
Just a quick note about angel investors, and when you in the early stage, when you inevitably have them on your board of directors, they take a lot of hand holding.
Mhm.
and
It's
why?
it's
In which
because they're not particularly knowledgeable. They don't have the resources that a biotech venture capital group would have. You spend a lot of time explaining, and inevitably, of course, things don't go exactly the way that you think they're going to go, and it's a big part of the job. Investor relations, investor management is a big part of the job in the early stages.
Yeah, we have a positive experience, Owen, if I may chime in here, with our board as well. I mean, they're well versed and, know the market from the financial side of things, but, we find ourselves educating them on how we operate and, how we, like the technical side of things. There's definitely, it's a harmony, a positive from their side. They educate us, and it works the other way around, and it works very well because at the end of the day, ultimately, both their goal and our goal is the success of the company, right? So.
if I can relay one thing from my past experience, and just going back to Nick's comment about the advice I gave on manufacturing, I learned that the hard way. So, and I've learned a couple things the hard way. One of my earlier investments was funded by a large group of initial seed with a large group of investors, seed investors. One thing that we found helpful is to have an experienced in the field other member on the board who, when things, as Bill you mentioned, inevitably you hit a hiccup along the way and you have to change the plan, or you need to raise more capital, or something goes sideways, and it's biotech. There's every experiment has a gray answer, not a black and white answer. Those board members with the experience who could then talk to the seed investors were very useful. So, and I would encourage that as well, because possibly the seed investors look at management or myself as like, oh well, he's just trying to save his job or something else, or oh, there's one. But if the independent board member who has great experience can talk and make sure that everyone understands, and that this does make sense, and we're going this way, and that there is some, in their view, that there's something there. I found that a great way to manage. They're very helpful in managing seed investors, because they're very valuable, especially in the Canadian environment where it's hard to find that very early money. But they do require and deserve to be kept informed and kept educated, because they've taken that risk with you. So that's an experience that I had in that space, and going from there. So there is another question that came up on the chat, which I think is very interesting. We touched just a moment there, Gadir, with yourself, but a bit more about any success from pulling monies from other streams. And they put in here the CMIE. So,
Yes, of
full
course.
disclosure, I'm a co-lead on that. So if you want to get something off your chest, now's a good time to do it. But,
We'd like your approval.
we're trying. We have to be very careful what we say on these things.
That's right.
I don't want this to be Exhibit A in a Toronto Star. No, but in all seriousness,
Yes.
these programs are we're very involved in them. They have great intentions. They have great utility. They do come with strings. We all know that there's a lot of reporting, and that's reasonable considering the fact of what they're doing on these things, and that's part of life on these. But it doesn't dilute your capital, and going from there. I don't know if I think everyone here has or had a pitch within the CMIE, but there are other granting agencies. Has anyone gone to the U.S. agencies for any of the granting, or outside of Canada? Has anyone else done that?
We did a little bit of work with BARDA and the US government for a while, but I mean, because we're still moving into clinical right now, it was still a lot of earlier stage for us on the pharmaceutical side of things. I still think they're used to seeing a lot of med tech, which is a little different, but we were there for a while and it was still a little early for them. But I know there's a lot of money out there, especially on the US government side, that's available to get, and I think it's fairly accessible if you have products that are ready to go that they can use.
Yeah, Bill, did you have you're nodding your head? Did you have experience with the foreign sources?
Not directly, but I agree with the sentiment from Nick. I think there is money out there, and it's a good idea to educate ourselves about what is available. I'd like to raise one more point that doesn't get talked about very much anymore. A couple of the startup companies I've been involved in became small public companies in Canada. It's That's much less common now than it was perhaps 10 or 15 years ago. Um, it comes with its own set of challenges, and I'm not sure I would readily recommend it to folks. It's a lot of compliance issues, as a small public company. It's expensive. It actually, just becoming public doesn't solve your fundraising problem. You have to constantly work on that, and in particular when you're dealing with small retail investors, it has multiple challenges there. But I was wondering if anybody, Owen, do you have any comments about
Yeah.
that as an option? I mean, 20 years ago, it used to be a thing, right? I mean, you'd go on the TSX or the TSX Venture Exchange and have a market cap in the 20 or $30 million range, and but that's not really done anymore, I don't think.
Yeah, I think yes. So I don't know if anyone else wants to speak, but I'm happy to speak for a few moments. In something along possibly diagnostics or the manufacturing side, where you're closer to a revenue stream, there is a real opportunity to go into Canadian public markets, or there used to be, and have some success. The problem with the retail of the small markets was always the fact in our space, if you're in therapeutics or in diagnostics where you're going to do a clinical trial and revenue is still 4 or 5 years down the line. You can have a great idea, but it's 4 or 5 years down the line. The problem becomes you're going to do a public offering early of a small dollar figure in Canada, say $40 million. And that's going to get you to the end of, say, a phase one, maybe start a phase two. And then you're going to go back to the market and ask for more money. And you have a market cap of only $30 million, and you're going to ask for $80 million. And that becomes very hard on the dilution in the public markets. If you don't have institutional investors who are going to come by and say, yes, I'm going to step in and I'm going to do a follow-on round because I'm going to support this company. The need for support has really, that's where the retail investor is not expecting that they are going to get diluted or expected to do a rights offering or follow on to protect their percentage ownership, where an institutional investor might. The other thing that's happened, particularly from the US market, and you're seeing this across the board in my opinion, is the breadth and depth of the private equity markets and the VC markets is so huge now. In particular, this is true in IT, where companies can go a very long time without going public in the IT business. But you can now go longer in the pharmaceuticals in the US markets as well before you go onto a NASDAQ market. And then my last comment is going to be, and Bill, you've probably seen this, and so I refer to it as the roller coaster, ride of biotech, where you're in a space where everyone believes it's just so fantastic. This is the greatest. The investment bankers are knocking on your door telling you now's the time to go to the market. It's blah, blah, blah. And then someone's study fails, and then another person's study fails, and then someone was caught with their finger in the cookie jar, and then the investors have abandoned it, and you're down at the bottom of the cycle again with a fantastic product and no capital. And you go on these up and down cycles, and retail investors rightly have struggled with sticking through that. So I do think that the retail market in the therapeutic side is a struggle in the earlier stage, and the development of the amount of capital in the private equity and the VC markets has allowed you to not have to go public too early. If I was closer to cash flow positive, I might have a different view of that, because then the retail, I might not be going back to the market at a flat valuation to ask for more capital, because the investing group would say, you took my $1 and turned it into 70 cents. Why should I do this again? You're just going to turn it into 40 cents just on the dilution. So that's why I don't think we see that right now. That's become problematic. And of course, having said that, tomorrow someone will go public with a radiopharmaceutical program at a market cap of 200 million. I'll look like a fool. So that's my take on that. There is a good question here, and Bill or Gadir, this is raising capital for the CRO, CDMO, the manufacturing side. Yes. Versus radiotherapies. We've talked a little bit about this.
Yes. So,
but what's your story difference there? How's the positioning story? How do you shake out and find the right investors?
I mean, clearly you would obviously know how to tell your story, and from a CDMO or manufacturing side of things, the return of investment on the investor side is not as lucrative, let's say, as a drug that gets developed and obviously makes a successful, story in the market. So on that side, we're fully cognizant and aware of that. And when we made our list of who do we want to talk to, Bruno and I, we obviously targeted those investors who, like the private equity, that are interested in the CDMO space. And that was our criteria when we started to, look for them. And, we go to conferences, investor conferences such as Bloom Burton, for example, is a big one that we attend, and, the biggest in Canada that happens once a year, April or May. And when we set up those one-on-one meetings, that's the first thing that we tell them is, we are a CDMO, and this is, how much revenue we're making, and this is what we're projecting, by 5 or 10 years. And that you find that when you do that, Owen, that basically limits your candidates, right, to what I would call the real investors who you could continue further discussions with. On the venture capital, of course, their return on investment needs are different. And, companies like, a good success story from CPDC, Fusion, right, that you spun out, right? Also CPDC spun out Artemis in combination with Triumph and a few other partners. And, all of these successful startups, I mean, they can tell you maybe a different story when they went out and spoke with venture capitals. But, all in all, to say that when you do your homework, right, and you study these investor portfolios, you understand very well who fits with your needs or not. And, don't go with the ones that basically are a waste of your time and theirs, right? I mean, we were pretty conscious about that, as soon as we started. And and also like the value that they are willing to invest, right? Like Bruno and I spoke to some who were saying, no, we were looking to put in more, right? So that's not what we asked for, right? So it's, you have to understand what your needs are. And as you said, right, like strings come on the other side. So you have to be aware of, yes, if they ask for something, then there's something in return that you have to give, right? So, Basically, that's our side of the story. And luckily, the CDMO space in radiopharma is has a high momentum. So we were very well positioned to be in the right space at the right time. I don't know if Bill and Nick can add more to this side of the story.
Well, I think there's an interesting link between the CDMO business and the radiopharmaceutical development business. I mean, if you're running a CDMO
Yeah.
and your client base is Novartis and Bayer and people like that, and you get a steady business from them,
Correct.
you know, the world's your oyster. But if you're relying on radiopharmaceutical development ventures trying to raise the money to pay you to do the manufacturing, that's a much different
Fully
business.
agree, Bill. Yeah, we were very fortunate that our portfolio is lucrative and an attractive opportunity, as you said, right? Because there aren't very many CDMOs out there that know what we do, right? And they're limited, and the ones that are there, this is their opportunity basically to shine in the investor market.
But I will make one comment.
Yes.
Today, Atom V looks like such a screamingly obvious investment.
Yes.
2 years ago,
Not for Canada.
you knocked on so many doors
Yes, we did.
because they didn't understand where this was going, and the world changes, and you have to be in the right place, the right time, with the right story, and ready to move. And that's why I think you're successful. I think that happens with others. And to that end, I know we're running out of time here, but I do want to bring up one thing that I meant to get back to earlier. Nick, how long did it take you from your first pitch book that you've now buried in your backyard to your first, close of your seed round? How was the timeline?
So we officially started fundraising in January, but we were working with our lead investor a few months before that. So I would say November last year, and then the first check came in March of this year. And it was a pretty slow burn up until now. And I think you just said it moments ago, momentum's a hell of a drug, right? It's really finding that momentum or catching that fire at the right time and really riding it out. And I think just from a very early stage perspective too, you've just got to keep pitching. You've got to keep swinging at it, and you've got to take that feedback and improve the deck and improve your message and like have something that's really coherent for people. But yeah, you've just got to keep swinging, especially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry, Owen, I know we're running out of time, but really critical for the audience here to remember that the forefront leadership position of Canada in nuclear medicine. I mean, we are known in the world. I mean, iodine supply comes, 60% of it comes from McMaster. Triumph has the biggest cyclotron in the world. I mean, and the list goes on. I don't want to exclude anyone, right? But just a few examples to show you that, by convincing Canadian investors to keep the money here so that we can expand our businesses, we can keep our talent, right? The talent is so critical, creating those jobs, those high-paid, well-paid, high professional jobs, and attracting clinical trials here. I mean, to me, that continues the success story of Canada that we shouldn't forget. I mean, the legacy should go on, right?
I agree, and we are going to have to wrap this up right now. So I am going to just pull everything together. And first off, I want to thank Nick, Bill, Gadir for joining us here. I think it's been really interesting. We could go on and on for a couple other things here. I'm going to leave though with just one or two very quick takeaways that I'd like to pass on to people who are listening. I think we talked about getting your story right, figuring out who the investor community is the right one for you, figuring out how they're going to make money. They're not as in love with your science as you are. They're in love with their money, and that's why you're going to them. This is not a government agency that you're going to. This is not education. They're investors, and they're measured on their return on their investment. So you need to tell them why you're going to make them money. The other thing is the length of time that this takes. Do not underestimate the length of time this takes. But getting out there, telling the story, and going from there. I counted up my Series A from 2007. We knocked on 43 doors. across North America, and once we got our lead, everything came beautifully from there. But we knocked on a lot of doors for a lot of time, and we, as Nick and Bill mentioned, we updated our pitch book as the story got tighter. So with that, thank you all once again for joining us. I really enjoyed this meeting, and I'd love to turn it back to Melody now to kind of wrap us up and tell us where to go, politely.
Thanks, Owen. I know we're running out of time here, but just a couple of very brief remarks in parting from CNIC. Gadir, earlier this meeting, you shared a sentiment that you hope that investors can see the potential of a drug earlier and understand the entire supply chain and the potential of an idea to help with connect with that capital earlier. So our hope as CNIC in partnership with organizations like the CMIE is that through these types of events, we can improve that information sharing on emerging trends and data with industry, with researchers and the investment community, as well as government bodies to help improve access to that early stage capital and really work to ensure that those supports are there from manufacturing all the way through patient delivery. So I really just wanted to also quickly flag a recent opportunity for funding that has come to the CNIC from Invest Ontario, which is a program under the Government of Ontario. Invest Ontario is looking to make some new transformative investments in life sciences, specifically projects within the nuclear medicine pipeline to address a few different value chain gaps. They have approached us for help in identifying some eligible projects that will address these gaps within the ecosystem and to create new value-added jobs to ensure investment kind of across the ecosystem in capital expenditures, new infrastructure, new equipment, eligible research, and a lot of other different projects could be considered under this umbrella of Invest Ontario. This includes both companies with current operations in Ontario and those who might be looking to establish in Ontario. So I'd encourage anyone who might have an eligible project to reach out to learn more with us and Invest Ontario with this. With that, I'd like to quickly thank, on behalf of the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council, all of our speakers today for sharing your leadership and your expertise with us, and again to the CMIE for your sponsorship of this event. We look forward to hosting our third webinar as part of this series in partnership with the CMIE in the new year, where I'm sure we will continue to build on some of these themes. And so I hope I can see everyone back again for that event. Very quickly, before I wrap things up, I would like to invite everyone to attend the 2025 Canadian Radiotheranostics Leader Summit, which will be held on June 12th and 13th of next year. This is an annual event that's hosted by the CNIC in partnership with CMIE and a coalition of leading academic centers, including UHN, London Health Sciences, the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health, and BC Cancer, that really aims to bring together all the leaders from the radioisotope industry, healthcare and research, with investment and government at all levels to shape the future of radiotheranostics in Canada. We still have lots of opportunities to get involved or to support the event, so please reach out if you're interested for more information. And with that, I'd like to conclude this event. And once again, thanks to CMIE and our speakers and to everyone for joining us today. If you'd like to go back and rewatch this event, it will be available on the CNIC website or our YouTube channel within the next couple of days. And I hope to see you all again at our next webinar in January 2025. Thanks.